So today I thought I'd just talk about a couple of arguments I came up with against Cartesian substance dualism, specifically interactionist versions. Now, they certainly aren't polished or anything, and they're very much open to criticism, and I would agree that they are rationally deniable. I think you could be rational in denying these arguments, but I just came up with these ideas, and I thought they were interesting, and I decided to put them into an argumentative form. So the first argument I will present is much more critical of interactionist substance dualism, in that the conclusion purports to show that substances cannot causally interact at all, whereas my second argument tries to give interactionist substance dualism a little more benefit of the doubt, and tries to actually show that there is a possible way where there could be interaction, but that the position is just very ad hoc and not very tenable. So the first argument goes like this. Premise 1. Interactionist substance dualism takes the physical and mental to be separate Cartesian substances. That's just true by definition. Premise 2. If X is a Cartesian substance, then there is a possible world W in which only X exists. Now, this is a typical definition of a Cartesian substance, that you will see given by people like Ralph Weir, for example, in his presentation on Cartesian dualism. And for the purposes of this argument, I think the definition suits just fine. So, from the first and second premises, we can conclude that interactionist substance dualism holds that there is a possible world in which only the mental exists, and a possible world in which only the physical exists. Premise 3. If X is such that there is a possible world where only it exists, then X cannot in principle be dependent upon anything not X, whether causally or existentially. This is pretty clear from what it means to exist in a possible world by yourself. So let's just take the mind. So let's say there's a possible world where only the mind exists. So that would be the mind, its mental contents, its mental properties, etc. So if only the mind, its processes, its contents, its properties, etc. exist, then the causes for any of those things cannot be non-mental, because the only things that exist in that possible world are minds and mental things. And the existence of any of those things can't be dependent upon anything non-mental, because the only things that exist in that world are minds, mental things, etc. And the same logic would apply to a possible world in which only the physical exists. One could possibly object here and say that, sure, in its own possible world, minds, mental contents, etc., those things cannot be causally or existentially dependent upon non-mental things, but they can be if they aren't in a world where they're by themselves. They can be causally or existentially dependent on non-mental things if they are in a world with non-mental things, and vice versa for the physical. But this is specifically why I say in principle. Because if you analyze the possible world in which only the mind exists, and then you take the contents of that world, and you move it into a world with other non-mental things, nothing changes about the mental things that you're moving. If the mind is a Cartesian substance, then there's going to be nothing that changes about it between the world in which it only exists and the world in which it exists alongside non-mental things, and vice versa for the physical. So from that, in the previous premises, we can conclude with conclusion 2 that the mental cannot in principle be causally or existentially dependent on anything non-mental, and the physical cannot be in principle causally or existentially dependent on anything non-physical. Premise 4. Interactionist substance dualism requires causal interaction between substances, and that's just by definition. Premise 5. Causal interaction entails a dependency relation. Causal interaction is always going to entail some sort of dependency relation, specifically between the cause and its effect. The effect is going to be dependent upon the cause. So if we look at a standard causal picture of the Cartesian substance dualist, we would say something like the physical act of running. The act of running is a physical effect, and this can be traced back to the immaterial mind causing the physical brain to send some sort of messages throughout the body in order for the physical effect of running to obtain. So given that kind of standard Cartesian picture of causality, we can see that the physical effect has a dependence relation upon the mental cause. There seems to be some sort of dependency relation that is entailed by causal interaction, specifically between two Cartesian substances. If this is the case, then conclusion 3 follows. Interactionist substance dualism is false, because interactionist substance dualism would be committed to conclusion 2, premise 4, and premise 5, which form an aporetic triad, meaning that they are a set of inconsistent positions. And so since interactionist substance dualism entails a contradiction, it cannot obtain. I think of things in a visual manner most times, and I like to think of causal interaction between substances as something like a ghost trying to interact with something physical. Like, if you see in a movie, a ghost they just pass through walls, they pass through objects, they can't interact with any of the physical objects because they're on completely separate realms. And that picture is actually very similar to parallelism, which is a substance dualist position, which I actually think is probably the most plausible position to take for a substance dualist. But anyway, let's move on to the second argument against interactionist substance dualism. Like I said earlier, this technically doesn't refute interactionism. It just shows that any possible way of interaction is going to be pretty ad hoc and implausible. So premise 1 begins by stating that interactionist substance dualism, or ISD, holds that the mind and the physical are two separate Cartesian substances which causally interact. That's just true by definition. And you will see some similarity between the premises of this argument and the premises of the last argument, but this one is very different. Premise 2. If X is a Cartesian substance, then there is a possible world W in which only X exists, which I explained before. So, therefore, interactionist substance dualism holds that there is a possible world in which only the mind exists, and a possible world in which only the physical exists. So far, it's the same as the last argument. Premise 3. If there's a possible world in which only the mind exists, then the mind must be a unique set that contains all mental properties. Since the word mental, by its very nature, refers to the mind, the word mental means belonging to the mind. If there is a possible world in which only the mind exists, then there would be nothing mental missing from that possible world. So the mind, as a Cartesian substance, would be something like a set which contains all possible mental properties and contents. This doesn't mean that any one mind has all mental properties at once, like pleasure and pain at the same time or anything. And so, conclusion 2 follows that ISD holds that the mind must be a unique set that contains all mental properties. Premise 4. If there's a possible world in which only the physical exists, then the physical must be a unique set that contains all physical properties for the same reasons that I laid out before. So conclusion 3, ISD holds that the physical must be a unique set that contains all physical properties. Premise 5. If the mind and the physical are unique sets, then they share no members with any set other than itself. This is just true by definition, for a set to be a unique set is such that it does not share any other members with any other set. Premise 6. Two sets that do not share any members with any set other than themselves are disjoint sets, which is just true by definition. Conclusion 4. ISD holds that the mind and the physical are disjoint sets. Premise 7. Any interaction between set A and set B entails the existence of a set C, which is the interactive intersection of sets A and B. The only possible way that two sets can be related, or interact in this case, is if there is a set which serves as the intersection between the two sets. So let's take set A to include 1, 2, and 3, and let's take set B to include 3, 4, 5. Set A and set B are able to be related because they share a member, and this entails the existence of a set C, which includes the shared members of sets A and B, which is the number 3. But if two sets need to share a member in order to be related, how can two disjoint sets be related? Premise 8 explains this. The interactive intersection between two disjoint sets is always the empty set. Now, the empty set is a set with no members. The reason the empty set can serve as the intersection between two disjoint sets is because two disjoint sets share no members. And if you can only relate two sets by the members they share, then the members that the two disjoint sets share would be nothing. So you have to relate them with a set that has no members, which is the empty set. Premise 9 is definitely a bit of a tricky one. It says that the empty set is best conceived of as God. And I have a few reasons to believe this. First of all, if we take God to be God as classically conceived, God is a simple entity, which means he is a purely holistic entity. He has no parts whatsoever. There's no sort of composition within him. Now, the empty set is a set with no members. It is a purely holistic, simple entity. Another reason to think that God is somewhat parallel to the empty set is because it seems like the empty set is the foundational set, and God is the foundational entity. Take set A, which is 0 and 1. The power set of set A is set B, which is 0, 0, 0, 1, 1, 0, and 1, 1. But we can ask whether set A itself is a power set of a previous set. Well, it is. Set A is the power set of the null set, which contains the null string, so it's a set with one member. And the null set is the power set of the empty set, and you can't go back any further. The empty set is the foundational set, which contains no members, so it is a foundational, purely holistic, simple entity, which sounds very much like God. So, if we take the empty set to be God, then C5 follows. ISD holds that any interaction between the mind and the physical entails the existence of God, which is the interactive intersection of the mind and the physical, from premises 7, 8, and 9. This position sounds suspiciously like occasionalism, and I would just flat out say that it is occasionalism. So, conclusion 6 follows, from C5, ISD must hold to occasionalism, if it is to maintain interaction. Premise 10. Occasionalism is an ad hoc, theoretically vicious, and unparsimonious position. I think most people would agree with this, so I don't want to delve too much into defending it. If you have to maintain occasionalism in order to maintain interactionist substance dualism, then you're just better off choosing a more parsimonious view other than interactionist substance dualism. It also has very strange implications for free will, particularly the free will of God. Does my mental activity cause God to cause my body to move? If that's the case, then we are controlling God, which just seems like a very weird and unparsimonious conclusion. So if occasionalism is an ad hoc, theoretically vicious, and unparsimonious position, then it should be rejected. And so it should be rejected. And then if occasionalism is rejected, and interactionist substance dualism entails occasionalism, then interactionist substance dualism should be rejected. If anyone's interested in learning more about sets and power sets, Eric Steinhardt on YouTube has some very good videos on set theory and how it relates to Plotinus and Plotinus's arguments for the one, which influenced me to draw the connection between God and the empty set. Now, like I said, I certainly believe one could rationally denounce these arguments, and I'm sure these arguments don't work. So I would love any feedback in the comments, whether you think they work, or whether you think they don't work, and why you think they work, or why you think they don't work. So that's everything I have for today. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.